Hey everybody, Jonathan Fields with another episode of Good Life Project. So my guest today is a really cool guy who's a co-founder of a company called RUNA, and I want to say it's a tea company, but it's really not. It's a movement. It's something much bigger that's reaching out into the world and doing some incredible things. So Tyler Gage, it's awesome to be hanging out with you today.
Thanks, Jonathan. Thanks for the opportunity.
So I want you to take me back, because right now we're hanging out in Brooklyn, we're in your office, and you are on the phone around the world, and you have a tea company, but it's really not just a tea company. This is a vehicle. Take me back to when just the initial seed of this idea started, and what's it all about?
So I guess my personal background, I grew up in California in the suburbs. I originally went to college to play soccer and study politics. Wandered into a course my freshman year called Religion Gone Wild, Spirituality and the Environment. So I tried to, mess things up a little bit. In this course was exposed to a lot of different ways that mostly indigenous people relate to the environment around them, and looking at different ways through their myths, their stories, their language. They have pretty unique ways of relating to the natural world that for me, coming from the suburbs near San Francisco, was pretty exciting.
Right.
So next step, I got invited by a professor who had studied native languages in the Amazon for 18 years to help him do some research after my freshman year.
So to go to the Amazon and do it?
Yeah, to go down.
Wow.
So jumped at the opportunity. And at that point, as a young person, really wanted to get exposed personally. Kind of read and kind of understood these other ways of experiencing the natural world, and protecting the environment, and wanted to experience it firsthand.
So was this like to go down there for a semester or for?
It originally was a summer. I was only supposed to go down for a couple weeks.
Right.
Ended up staying down for the better part of 2 years.
Wow.
So took time off of school, kind of dropped out. And basically for about 2 years, wandered through most of South America and a bit of Central America.
So what were you actually doing there?
So I started helping to translate this professor's research, because a lot of his kind of crazy field notes he was trying to compile into useful texts and documents. And then I was living with different indigenous communities. The longest period was with a group called the Shipibo, who live on the Ucayali River in eastern Peru. Indigenous group with pretty deep traditions of plant medicine for the most part. They say that the rainforest is their pharmacy, it's their supermarket, so their knowledge of this incredible source of plants around them is quite impressive. So spent a lot of time originally just absorbing. I mean, I was 18, I didn't have a whole lot to contribute beyond the fact that I could speak Spanish fluently. And just bit by bit trying to relate and experience the way that these people relate to the rainforest, and how in many ways, their notions of stewardship or conservation are actually part of their language. So for me, kind of my research took a lens through trying to understand actually how these native languages are structured, how they function in a way which is actually essentially different from English. So a great example of that is the name of our company, RUNA. So RUNA in the Quechua language very simply means person or people. At the same time, they'll also say like a tree RUNA or a jaguar RUNA. So their notion of personhood is actually shared across plants, animals, and humans.
Oh, that's cool.
So there's really no division. And then actually you can imagine if your notion of what a person is, and agency and identity, was the same for a tree as it was for a person, you can imagine how that might affect your ideas of conservation and relationship to the forest. So that kind of was really stimulating, really inspiring for me as a person. But a lot of what I saw was, in doing research, I'd spend a lot of time in different ceremonies as well, where these communities would spend all night in these healing ceremonies. Incredible expressions of the native culture is kind of the full what you dream of when you think of native people in the Amazon.
Right, and coming from, like living in a suburb of San Francisco.
Yeah, pretty different.
Right.
But almost always, do that all night. As soon as the sun would rise, I'd hear chainsaws cutting down hardwood trees, so the families could get, a couple bucks, some money to feed their families.
So this is with the tribes cutting down their own trees.
Yeah, and I talk to the farmers and say, hey, what's the story? They say, well, we don't have ways to make money, so if it's a tree or my child, I'm going to choose my child, which any reasonable person would do.
Sure.
And really seeing that kind of the main destructive force and the main challenge that these people face is lack of economic opportunities. If they don't have ways to make money in a world which is now pretty forced upon them. In Ecuador, where we work, more than 50% of their entire economy is based on oil. So when the only ways they can make money are oil fields or cutting down trees, you can imagine what that does to language, culture, everything else.
And that's just the default option.
It's just the default option.
That's what you do.
Right? Yeah, and at the same time too, like the people who we work with and most of the people I've lived with, they're not these like fully remote, pristine, tribal people who have never seen a white person. They're people who are really struggling and trying to figure out what parts of their culture that they've inherited for thousands of years they want to keep, and what parts of the modern world, like access to health services and education, that they really want to be a part of.
Right.
So it's this tricky balance between the two.
So the word RUNA, I mean, if that applies to a tree, would their culture basically say like their choice would be like that should be preserved, it should be protected and honored and respected, or do they not really sort of feel that way? It's like, let me rephrase it, is it perceived as like a really big bad thing to be cutting down trees, or is it just no big deal?
That's a great question. It's kind of tricky because the relationship they have to the rainforest, it's very intimate and it's about exchange. So for them, all their myths are around hunting and, a jaguar consumed a person that turned into this. It's this whole kind of natural cycle of production, reproduction, life, death, like those natural cycles which are familiar to them. So it's an interesting question because kind of that mindset of kind of people separate from nature is in some ways like a very modern concept that is actually pretty foreign to Native people. And that's part of our goal, is that a lot of conservation groups want to say, hey, you should just conserve the rainforest and try and not look at the relationship people have to the rainforest. Whereas with us, we're trying to look exactly at that intersection.
So I mean, because it sets up an interesting dynamic about like how much they actually care. Right. About like, is this just like the rainforest is here, we live among it, and so because it's available to us, if we can cut it down, we should, and that's the cycle of nature. Or
well, it's again everything like in moderation.
Right.
So it's the kind of thing where at this point, when they're wiping out almost all the hardwood trees that they can even walk to, that's the kind of thing they're pretty acutely aware that that's not a good thing.
Right.
But again, if it's their only way they can make money to pay the bus fare to send their kids to high school, they're going to do it.
Right.
So for them, it's not like this completely righteous thing where they're not going to do it, but it's also not this like, cut down some trees, like, they'll grow back sort of thing. So part of what we saw is, well, they have these incredible products. They have all these medicinal plants, these tea, sources of food that they consume that have never reached the market. So when I was living there, one of the products that I got to know was called Guayusa. And Guayusa is it's a leaf that grows in eastern Ecuador. They brew it like tea, even though it's not related to green or black tea. So the communities, they get up every morning about 4 o'clock in the morning, bright and early. The whole community sits around these big fires and boil these big clay pots full of the Guayusa tea. Dip gourds in, drink it, and they do a couple things in the early morning. They interpret dreams. They tell myths. So like the older shamans will tell the myths and stories of their communities and pass that down to the young people, and they plan for the day. So it's a pretty simple practice of people getting together, sort of their whole culture evolves around this pretty simple practice. Interestingly, though, no one had ever commercially produced this kind of tea. The first time I drank it, it gave me a pretty good boost of energy. It was one of the big takeaways that I had. We've actually learned through research that it has as much caffeine as a cup of coffee. They also attribute, reams of health benefits to this plant. And we've also learned it has double the antioxidants of green tea. So from a product perspective, we said, hey, it's got this killer flavor, it's really smooth, got this cool energy feature, all these health benefits, and no one's ever heard of it outside of these communities. And we started thinking, well, if they could produce this, they could make money, they could grow it sustainably in the rainforest, and we could introduce this unique part of their culture and the rainforest and share with people up here in the US.
So it gives them an alternative way to actually make money rather than cutting down the trees.
So kind of, crazy idea we thought of, and what a cool idea that would be. Went back to college. My last semester I took an entrepreneurship course with one of my best friends, Dan, and the main focus of the class was writing a business plan. So throwing out all sorts of horrible ideas, and one of which was a beverage company importing this tea to support these communities and make a new kind of energy tea. So we started researching the beverage industry, figuring what this would look like as a business. Our professor was strongly encouraged us to follow the idea. This was our last semester of college in December of 2008. Right then we won the whole Rhode Island State business plan competition, and our university business plan competition had like $70,000 in cash and services. And at that point, my best friend Dan was gonna go take a consulting job. I had a Fulbright grant to keep doing my research, but we took a step back and said, hey, this is a pretty solid opportunity. We have a lot of people who know the beverage industry telling us that this could really work. We had both worked for different nonprofits and were kind of frustrated with either just an academic approach or a pure job or something that was
so like the entrepreneurial
nonprofit.
approach was this really kind of different thing.
Yeah, it was a different thing. And I think it seemed very concrete. We said, if we can do this, if this works, we will help people.
Right.
We will be a direct source to really provide something new and really prove to people that business can be a force for good, which was really what inspired us. So we kind of took the crazy jump, moved to Ecuador in early 2009.
So wait, so you graduate college or no?
Graduated, yes, somehow. But did graduate.
And he's got a consulting gig lined up. You got
Yep.
Fulbright grant, and you're basically like, no thanks.
Yep.
I'm curious, how did the people around you feel about that decision at the time? It's like mom and dad and the family, like, you know.
Family was overall supportive.
Yeah.
I think people around us recognized our passion, like that we were really pursuing something which had some meaning. You know, a lot of people probably thought we were making a pretty silly mistake. At the same time, we were 23. Like, really, when all was said and done, to try something like this, even if we would have failed, or maybe we still will fail, still for the experience and the value of trying to have that entrepreneurial spirit was definitely worth it.
Yeah, I love that. And I think so many people don't realize that. You know, you want to succeed, especially because for you, there's something bigger. You're not just, it's not a business plan where you're trying to make money or, you know, like, there's a much bigger social cause, there's a drive behind it. But fundamentally, you know, like, no matter what happens, coming straight out of college, this is an unbelievable experience, you know, that translates to almost anything you're going to do from this point forward.
Yeah, and I really do, people ask me, or college students, hey, I have this idea, I'm thinking about starting it. I see no downside for young people trying to start a business. Right. I mean, most of them aren't going to work. You know, the odds were hugely against us for trying to start what we've started. But the experience that we've gotten, the opportunity, it's really incomparable to anything else. Right. And I think, you know, we're still young, but getting a sense of the workplace, I think people who can demonstrate that entrepreneurial spirit and at least the effort to try and put pieces together, it's really unlike anything else.
Yeah, no, completely agree. So you go from college and you go, so the next move is to Ecuador? And what happens down there?
First, we drank a lot of tea. That was the first step. Our inspiration was clear. We saw this indigenous tradition, which we loved, we were inspired by. We saw these people whose culture revolves around this experience of sitting around together, talking, trading stories, planning, interpreting dreams, and that really gives rise to everything else that they do. So we took a step back and said, what if this approach of working with partners, working in a very community-based environment could be the seeds of an organization? What would that look like? So we spent almost 6 months really talking to anyone we possibly could. And one of the weaknesses I'd seen living down there was there's a tremendous amount of lack of coordination. So even like little tiny towns and remote places, you can have multiple nonprofits working on the same issues that don't even know each other. So there's a tremendous lack of coordination between communities, NGOs, government. So we said, well, before we even try and do something, let's be a little bit humble and just figure out what's going on. So we talked to every government agency. We visited every farmer cooperative we could. We visited every community who invited us to come and talk to them and learn about their needs and their dreams. And really kind of took a pretty receptive approach for the first while. From there, we heard pretty similar things. Farmers would tell us, hey, like, we don't need more workshops. Like, we don't need more handouts. Like, we want markets, we want to produce, and we want to be respected for who we are. We want people who want to partner with us in a fair way and not either be patriarchal or, you know, support us in ways that really don't have any impact. So from there, we met a lot of people talking, and we found a couple guys in this little town called Archidona in the central Ecuadorian Amazon who'd worked with different forestry projects and agricultural projects and were really inspired by the same vision. So we teamed up with them, this was in about August of 2009, to start really researching, all right, we got to produce this stuff. Because part of the uphill battle we had was, you know, cool opportunity, first time to do this, pretty intimidating opportunity, how the heck do you produce this? So we started researching, you know, which leaves do you pick? How do you dry them? What temperatures? What percentage of humidity do
you have to basically go back and reverse engineer everything that these people just did on autopilot.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And for them too, you know, they'll harvest any leaf and be like, oh yeah, it's good. You know, we boil it and we'll drink it.
Throw it in the mix.
We're like, yeah, there's this, you know, import regulations and FDA and things that we had to sort of introduce to the new way of bringing this to market. So that was the first big step, was really figuring out how do we build both functionally a supply chain, so something where how can we get, you know, from leaves in the middle of the jungle to dried leaves in a product in the United States of America, And at the same time, we put a really heavy emphasis on building a value chain. So the cool opportunity was, well, we looked a lot at, say, chocolate. So chocolate's, huge commodity, which really, if you look at the history of chocolate, was built on the slave trade. So like the history of the economics of chocolate are basically built on slavery, and the impact of chocolate production is pretty unjust. I mean, it's a market and commercial structure which at its core has injustice. So we said, and I'd worked a little bit with fair trade, so fair trade chocolate is definitely growing. It's an incredible initiative. It's really hard because you're working against these like massive conglomerates with hundreds of years of trade for these like really deeply entrenched commercial relationships and ways of producing this good. So we said we have a whole blank slate. So what's cool is we're not working against any existing forces, any corporate interests. We can put all the pieces in place from the get-go, and if we do that right, make that the standard. So for example, if in the future anyone goes and tries to cut down the rainforest to produce Guayusa tea, that will be the abnormality. And if we're really successful working with governments and other partners, it couldn't even be possible. So we took an approach of both saying, all right, let's produce a product, we got to do that first and foremost. But secondly, let's really build a system, both in terms of commerce and agriculture, that can really create as much impact as possible from this one activity.
Which I guess it really comes from the place of you being inspired not so much by the product, but you went there because out of service to a community. Saying, how can we in some way, both help the environment, but at the same time take this community and give them an alternative source of income and access to a market that they would never have access to, rather than saying, here's a cool product, let's see how much we can make it and sell it for and make the biggest profit margin possible.
Exactly. And that's what we really look at. We say, RUNA for us is a vehicle. Like our mission, in short, is creating livelihoods for indigenous farmers. That's why the 40 plus people that work for us get up every day to accomplish this mission. And we love it because we have this incredible vehicle to do that. We have something which tastes great, it's got this great boost of energy, it's something that someone can drink and know that they're drinking the same thing that these people are drinking in the Amazon. So it's very tangible, it's very concrete, and it's market-based. So it's not charity, it's not some kind of crazy pay for ecosystem services conservation scheme, which can also be good, but it's very real. And it's also, in many ways, I think a way that we as humans relate between cultures. Especially in the Amazon, the hundreds of tribes often know each other because of the plants that the other tribes have. So they say, oh yeah, the Guaranis, they have this plant and that plant. And it's a way that we as humans kind of trade stories and trade connections between cultures.
So you start the saying, you're doing a whole bunch of research, you're documenting the processes, and then you brought up the phrase supply chain, right? Any experience knowing what a supply chain was or developing it in the past?
So I studied creative writing in college, was the major that I concocted. Zero experience. So I think, Dan and I, we took the approach of, we'll work day and night, we'll talk to everyone possible. Like we're, liberal arts students, we can synthesize different information. So let's talk to as many people who know about what we're trying to do and bring them on to really manage certain things. So one of the people we were incredibly lucky to meet early on is a guy named Tim Sullivan, who's been one of our most devout and amazing advisors. Tim was vice president at Pepsi for 35 years on supply chain and logistics.
Okay.
So Tim fell in love with what we were doing, the mission, wanted to help us. And Tim has been to Ecuador twice, really helped us think through all the dynamics of a supply chain. We've also become good friends with a guy named Nigel Mellican, a British tea consultant, great name for a British tea consultant, who's spent 35 years building tea factories and working both the agricultural production of tea and the processing. So he works with us constantly looking at our processing techniques, drying, factory, all that sort of stuff. So
at this point also, you're making any money? At that point?
At that point, no. At that point, it was in the red.
So you're not making any money. So these two guys, who are high-level operators, come in for the good of the project?
No. So not exact chronology. So I guess the first step was, so with these local guys who we team with, we started raising money. So we raised some investments, first off, friends, family, anyone we could convince to be inspired by our vision. From there, we actually got a grant from the Ecuadorian government, from the Ministry of Exports. We brought this really innovative plan around producing this new Ecuadorian good, and they gave us a $50,000 grant to put up our first test facility. So that was like a good boost of confidence.
Right. And that was a facility in Ecuador?
Facility is probably a generous word. It was in our local manager's garage with like a little dryer and like a little mincer mill. And I think we got pretty good in terms of the reality, and then also we could kind of leverage our successes.
Yeah.
So at that point we had like the world's first, commercial research facility for Guayusa. Sounded pretty cool. It was like a little metal chamber with some heat, like in this dude's garage. So from there we can then go to other investors and say, hey, we're producing, we have initial research, like then we can kind of build step by step. So we really tried to pick like little milestones, really accomplish things step by step, prove to people that we could do what we said we were going to do, and then build off early successes.
Right. And then these operators become more attracted to something because you're starting to prove more and more of the model.
Right, exactly. So then so Tim, for example, from Pepsi, like he himself invested, and then based on a guy like Tim, we could bring on other people and try to gain momentum bit by bit.
Yeah, which is, I mean, it's fascinating to me also because I think one of the biggest challenges for any startup, whether it's socially oriented or profit oriented, is finding those one or two mentors / operators who really can completely escalate the game, who can make introductions, who actually know a lot of the answers. And on the one hand, they can be incredibly empowering and enabling for organizations, but on the other hand, I've also seen startups and founders basically saying, well, if we can't get this person, then we can't do it, rather than saying, we'll kick, scream, and fight and do whatever we need to do to figure it out. I get the sense that you guys would have done it anyway, but these guys made that part of the journey a whole lot more accessible, a whole lot faster.
Yeah, I think it definitely provided like a support network.
Right.
So what we did with a lot of these guys is we formed a board of advisors. So it wasn't a board of directors, wasn't anyone like breathing down our necks telling us what to do, but guys who said, hey, like you guys run around and do your thing, and we're here to be like a support of, you probably don't want to do that, talk to this person, let's think through this a bit more. So sort of a steadfast group who could kind of keep us in check, provide connections, insights, wisdom, experience.
Right.
And that was like a really great move. So we gave each one of them like a small bit of the company, so they were also owners and incentivized. And yeah, the 7 of them have been with us since close to day one.
And the structure of this is for profit?
So we're a hybrid organization.
Okay.
So partly back to the topic of how do we structure a value chain and think through the long-term impact of this. So we decided to create both nonprofits and for-profits. So the base of it is a for-profit supply chain. So we have a company in Ecuador, buys teas from farmers, transforms it into basically loose leaf tea, exports that to our US company, RUNA USA, for-profit, buys this ingredient from the Ecuadorian company, makes beverages, tea bags, and sells those for profit. And that's really the main pillar of what farmers said. Like, we need a market, we guarantee good prices, we pay cash on the spot, we pay an additional 15% premium to the farmer cooperative to support local projects. At the same time, we realized that that needs to be the driving force. It needs to happen as business, that's the way to do it. At the same time, we're really trying to rebuild these economies. Like, we don't have the small mission of, I'll pay some farmers, they make some money, like, that's great, like, we did a great thing. Like, our biggest vision is to really transform how these economic systems work in the Amazon and really look more at this word livelihoods that we focus on. So for us, if these farmers just have a bit more cash, that's not really a livelihood. For them, they want a life which allows them to send their kids to school and have educational opportunities. They want clean water in their communities. They want access to government organizations, other support. They really want a life that both comes from their philosophy as indigenous people, but has access to the tools and resources they need to work towards their vision of a future in the Amazon. So to do that as a company is really hard because we're sort of working against this pretty big gap in the market. I mean, we're working with these communities who have been discriminated against for hundreds of years, and they have still a pretty heavy amount of both racism, discrimination, saying, oh, you're indigenous, move to the city, work for an oil company. So there's really no support structure for them to kind of build their own system. So what we said is, what if there was a foundation who could really be dedicated to supporting the farmers? And in some ways it's interesting because we wanted the foundation to work against the company. So it's sort of a reverse of a classic corporate foundation sort of thing of hey, help us do the mission of the company. But to say you're a separate organization and your job is to make sure the company does things right. So that as this thing grows and makes more money, you're really the baseline of the mission. So you make sure that trees are planted, you make sure it's all organic certified, it's fair trade certified, and kind of stewarding that value chain in a much broader way. So I think it's been an effective structure so far. It's definitely created a much like richer platform so we can do a lot more things to fuel this broader mission that we have.
Right. I love the fact that you're building this whole thing. You're building essentially a new hybrid structure that you're talking about and kind of reversing the way that the whole system works. Talk to me about your first sale. How does that all unfold?
So the very first sale, we had this little like test facility, again, the garage with a little dryer. We had a couple pounds of really poorly milled dried leaves. We shipped those up through like USPS basically to our friend's apartment in Providence, Rhode Island. We made some little labels printed out on a basic printer. We got some little pouches, packed them with the tea, labeled it on, sealed it up, and we had a loose leaf tea product. It was pretty bad. It was pretty bad.
The product itself was pretty bad?
Yeah, I mean, it was like dusty. The labels had like the white border from being miscut from the printer.
Right.
But we had something. Like we had a product, we sold a few $1,000s and like...
Where'd you sell them?
Just like, you know, online. We had like a basic e-commerce thing. You know, again, friends for the most part, kind of helping us out buying the product. But it started as like the thought process of packaging and sales and pricing and again, pretty basic things which we just weren't familiar with. From there, we realized that we really needed to work with a branding agency, someone who knew how to build a brand and recognize that in our industry, like there's product on one level and there's like brand on a whole nother level. So you look at like Red Bull, of course, being like the epitome of a company, which it's not really about a liquid in a can, it's about this bigger experience they've created. Right. So we worked with this company who helped us think through those issues, topics, design, how to communicate that with messaging, aesthetics, packaging, the full deal. And then we created a tea box. So we found a co-packer who could transform basically loose tea into tea bags in a box. We produced some of those in late 2010, I think was our first production run. And we started approaching stores. We approached Whole Foods first, figured it'd be a good target. Thankfully,
so you go for the big guns first.
We went for the big guns first. We met the buyer for, so Whole Foods is very regional in how they work, and the mid-Atlantic region, like the DC, Philly area. The buyer liked the product, placed an order, and we were rolling. So again, that was kind of get us to new territory, and then it was figuring out all the crazy logistics of distributing and managing this kind of consumer packaged goods, which is most of the reality that we deal with every day now.
So a lot of your time now is logistics.
A lot of it is. Honestly, like the consumer packaged goods industry, I wouldn't have known this. It's a very convoluted industry, just in terms of we technically sell to distributors who then sell to stores like Whole Foods as retailers. So we work with many different kinds of distributors with all sorts of pricing and promotion structures. We have our sales reps, we have other brokers, and just the basic sales and accounting and product delivery and all that seems kind of simple. You would think it might be, but it's like a lot. And as we work with dozens of distributors and thousands of accounts with different review schedules and margin structures and all sorts of stuff, it's a lot of the nuts and bolts that we have to push forward.
So at this point, so you've got to grow your team to handle this. And in the beginning, is it profitable? Is it break even? How is it? Because as you're growing, and I'm seeing this, we're seeing this in shelves, in stores. So tell me where you're at sort of in the business cycle now.
So we sell our products in about 3,000 stores right now, and that's about 18 months after we started selling our tea boxes.
So in 18 months, you have your product in 3,000 stores.
Yeah.
That's mind-blowing.
It's been a good bump.
I mean, especially considering it's a product which is fundamentally socially driven, like it's cause-driven rather than just purely for profit. I mean, that's tremendous.
Right. And that's actually an interesting relationship that we've looked a lot at since we started the business. Because it's one of the ways that we really don't believe what we do is cause marketing, and it's also where we draw the line in the sand with a company like Tom Shoes. Love Tom Shoes, but just to draw an example. So Tom Shoes, as an example, is a shoe company, and on top of being a shoe company, great shoe company, they donate products as a charity on top of the core business. So what we want to do is like the very base of our business, in doing business, we create impact. So for every bottle of tea that's sold, we had to buy those leaves from a farmer in Ecuador, and we paid them 3 times what they're making cutting down trees. So the basic structure of us doing business, like the impact sits right on top of the business model. So from that perspective, the goal with the business is selling product.
Right.
So it's this interesting dynamic where if someone drinks a bottle and says, oh my God, like the farmers in Ecuador, like I'm so inspired by this mission, and knows all the intricacies of how we work, the real impact of that versus someone who drinks a bottle and was like, well, tasted good.
Right.
Gave me a good energy.
Doesn't really
matter.
Yeah.
And in some ways too, you know, in today's world, organic food's becoming more of a trend. At the same time, it's not that big of a trend. So in like concrete numbers, Red Bull sells over $6 billion a year. I mean, crazy amount of product.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas some of the biggest natural foods companies, I mean, there's some billion-dollar natural foods companies, but not that many. And in some ways, being like kind of crunchy or organic potentially is kind of limiting to really people accessing the product.
Right.
Because if we have a product which can really represent energy or healthy energy, you can imagine any person from any walk of life, any part of the country, who would say, yeah, like I don't really like putting weird chemicals in my body if I need some energy. Give me something which tastes awesome, is low calories, like cool new product, which is a brand that I believe in, you know, at a good price point, a bottle for $1.99.
Right.
That potentially is a lot more scalable. So we spent a lot of time working on our messaging in terms of, you know, the quick snippet. Hey, you know, low calorie, great energy, much caffeine is a cup of coffee.
Right.
Great. And then if someone wants to learn more, they can really get into, hey, it's one of the only teas in the world which is only grown by small farmers. You know, we've planted over 150,000 trees. Anyone who wants to really learn about the depth of the brand, it's there.
So, but fundamentally, you're like, we need to create a product that people want to buy on a consumer level because they enjoy it, whether they want to buy in or not, because that's what's going to make the whole thing succeed. And we know at the end of the day that the bottom line for us is impact, and the top line is just more sales by, you know, like not by any means necessary, but by like whatever branding or selling points are the ones that are going to sell the most stuff.
Yeah, and it gets to a fine line, but for the most part, that's how we think about it. And also too, it's, you know, it would be really easy to say, you know, you could convince someone like, hey, I have this $7 bottle of tea, and like if you drink this, you will save the Amazon. Someone would be like, well, I'm not going to kill the Amazon. Like, sure, I'll buy it. Will they buy it again? Will they tell their friends about it? So trying to build that scalable brand and something that can really stick is how we think about scaling. So right now, you asked about the business cycle and where we are in the growth mode. We sort of like figured out basics. You know, we have pretty good distribution. We got some great stores that sell the product. And we're really looking at how can we scale efficiently and effectively. So the main driver per the previous conversation is building a brand. So it's not just putting a product on the shelf. It's the person who walks in the store, heard about RUNA, sees it, and buys the product. So how can we generate as much interest, demand, brand awareness as possible to really have the space to grow into? Because if we just put product on shelf and it stays there, we're not going to keep growing. So most of our energy is around building demand, educating people about RUNA, about Guayusa tea, and trying to fuel the growth that way.
So, and as we sit here in this conversation, you know, it's the fall in 2012. What are some of the general metrics in terms of impact?
So, our main metric that we judge ourselves by is income generated for farmers.
Okay.
So, kind of the pinnacle of that model is if we can generate income for these farmers, that really is the opening point for all these other things we talked about, education, healthcare, access to services to happen. So to date, we've generated over $100,000 of direct income for about 2,000 farming families. So none of it's plantation grown, it's independent farmers who grow these trees. We show up on the farms, pay cash on the spot, and it's been about $100,000 of income. In terms of scaling, the trees that they're harvesting from now, each family only has, on average, 10 trees. So really not that much. For them, it's great because they have 10 huge trees, and before they picked 2 leaves a day. So for them, they're like, hey, great, I'll harvest 100 pounds and sell it to you. It's right there in my farm. But for us to scale, it's not that much. So the good thing for us is the way that we get more volume is we have to plant trees. So we're actually helping them plant land that they might have cut down for growing corn, and kind of rebuilding the rainforest with these trees and with other trees. It takes about 2 years for those to grow before they can harvest from them. But so far we've planted about 150,000 trees.
Wow.
So really putting a big concerted effort into helping reforest this land and obviously creating more supply so we can keep growing in the future.
So 150,000 trees, about $100,000 in farmers' pockets, and 2,000 families finding a different way to actually generate income for the families.
Yep.
Powerful. I mean, in a really short period of time. And then when you think this is the beginning, you know, like so talk to me about, you know, like in your mind, where's it going? Like, what's your dream?
Good question. And that's always the dance, right? Because we have our day-to-day stuff right now, and we have to execute, and then thinking big. We're very clear that we started this to really make a big impact. Like, our mission wasn't, hey, let's help a couple families sell some loose leaf tea in a random coffee shop. We said we have an amazing product that has huge potential, and there are tens of thousands of these farmers throughout the Amazon who don't really have other opportunities. So if not only through this product, but if we can prove that this kind of social business can work, it can make money, it can help people, and have a structure where we can source innovative products, work with different communities, bring them to market, have a brand which can stand for innovative new products that have health benefits and functional boost, then we have a pretty big opportunity to grow. So we're actually expanding to Peru as we speak. We've had some demand from different indigenous groups there to support them with different both agricultural and community projects. And we really see this growing. So our goal is to be working with roughly 5,000 to 10,000 farmers in 2 to 3 years. And from there, if we can keep growing and making it work, sky's the limit. Yeah,
love it. I love how invested you are, and I love just sort of like it's like you look at everything and there's nothing where you say we can't do that. It's kind of like we'll figure it out.
Yeah, I think that's our mentality. Yeah. I mean, we definitely get beaten back every day.
Yeah, it's the nature of what you're doing. I mean, any entrepreneur in any field, that's going to happen. Yeah. But I mean, you're operating in really complex places of the world and complex dynamics and cultures. It's awesome.
It's been fun. I think we've also been really lucky to build just a great crew of people around us. Yeah. Like, people really believe in the mission. We have people from all over the globe, all different ages, coming together with the shared mission. So to participate in that kind of a culture, in that kind of a space every day is really exciting.
So the name of this project is Good Life Project. When I use that word with you or that phrase with you, if I ask, what does it mean to you to live a good life, what comes to mind?
Well, principally with us, it's having, for us as well, to have livelihoods which really support us. So when I think about that, the fact that I get up every day and have a job and know that my work goes into creating a better world, I think that's the base of it. And as well for us, so RUNA, as I said, means person. More deeply, they say it means a fully living human being. Or to be RUNA is to be fully alive. So for the Quechua people, that means that they know the stories of their ancestors, that they live in harmony with the world around them, that they know other cultures. And I think for me, that's a big part of it, is that to live a good life, it's about creating impact, knowing where I come from, knowing where I'm going, always living in a place where I'm guided from my heart and my values. And I think I trust that if I can keep doing that, things will continue to go well.
Love it. Amazing conversation. Loved learning a lot more about you and about this company and the brand that you're building and the impact that you're having. It's a powerful, powerful journey. So thank you for sharing your time with us today, and congratulations on the incredible success of what you're building, and wish you continued success.
Thanks, man. Thanks for the opportunity to come and share.
Hey, my pleasure. So Jonathan Fields sitting here with Tyler Gage, who's one of the co-founders of RUNA, signing off for Good Life Project.